It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Monday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you're joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, typically we do Herd Mentality on Tuesday, but I wanted to bump it to Monday this week because mandatory OTAs for the Buffalo Bills start on Tuesday. And so I'm guessing the rest of this week is going to be spent reflecting on what we've learned coming out of OTAs. And so if we didn't do Herd Mentality today, I was afraid it would get pushed all the way to like Thursday or Friday. And we have some really good stuff to get into. And so I wanted to go ahead and get it in on this Monday. One other piece of information that I want to get to is on Sunday afternoon, I was informed of something. And that is that my mother, who has recently retired, like in the last couple of weeks, she has informed me that she is now a listener to this podcast and that on her morning walks, she watches the YouTube version of the podcast. And, I didn't think she listened to it in the past. So now I got to make sure that I'm doing the right stuff here, saying the right things, speaking accurately about my family stuff, because now my mom is listening. And so, Mom, welcome to the podcast. Glad that you're joining us. Congratulations on the retirement, and looking forward to having some great discussions about the Buffalo Bills with you this season, because you're now listening to this podcast. You're going to be dialed in and ready to go. So super cool to have Mom on board watching and listening to the Locked On Bills podcast. All right, let's get started with these Herd Mentality questions. First one today comes from James, who says, I've heard Eric Wood, Mitch Morse, and Deion Dawkins all talk about how Aaron Kromer teaches different techniques to different players based on their bodies and skill sets. Can you give an example of different ways he might teach different players to do the same thing? This is a great, great question, James. And I had the opportunity to speak with Aaron Kromer one-on-one for a pretty extended period of time at the NFL Scouting Combine. And I'm going to get a chance to spend some more time with him in July in Texas at O-Line Masterminds. And a big part of what we talked about in February was exactly this, how he does teach different techniques to different players based on their bodies and skill sets. And what he explained to me is how you can have one player that is a guard that is 6'5", 350 pounds with 34.5-inch arms, who's a really good player. And you can have a guard that is 6'1.5", 305 pounds with 32.5-inch arms. And they're completely different body types. And there are just different techniques that you can give to players based on their skill set and physical traits that are going to lead to better success. The way that Tommy Doyle at 6'8" is going to execute is going to be a lot different than Ryan Bates. And so he tailors the techniques that are appropriate for the different measurements and skill sets that the players have. But I will say this, at the core of Aaron Kromer, there's two things that he really believes in. The first thing is that hand leverage is key for him. We talk a lot about bend and being able to leverage your hips and bend at your knees, and all of those things are really, really important. But hand leverage is something that really matters to him, where we probably don't talk about it enough, where, yeah, it's great to have your pads lower, but in offensive line world, hand leverage matters a lot. And number two is he does not believe in momentum as a blocker. You see a lot of these blockers, they're just big and powerful, and they fire off the ball and they get into people and they start running their feet and they can create some movement. Kromer would rather have you stay under better control and sit on your hips, right? So sit on your hips, really build a balanced base and get your hands leveraged, and that way you can turn out blocks and stay in control and sustain better. Where you have guys that just want to, explode off the ball, create that initial momentum and try to take advantage of that. Well, that's going to work in college. That's going to work if you're an offensive lineman at Oklahoma blocking some kid from Iowa State. But it ain't going to happen in the NFL where that other guy across from you is really, really friggin' good. So you better have the technique to go with it. And he believes in get your hands leveraged, sit on your hips, and then work your body into good positions and move your feet. So he's just a little bit different than a lot of the other offensive line coaches. And to be honest, his resume is off the charts. It speaks for itself. And I look forward to spending some more time with Coach Kromer in July and learning a lot more about his coaching philosophy and techniques. And, I can sprinkle in some things from time to time here on the podcast. The next one comes from DK. Has a couple of good ones for us. And he makes a statement here that I guess I do feel a little bit alone when I say this, but DK says, you seem to be more confident in the O-line than most Buffalo media personalities. A large portion of that seems to be from the hiring of Coach Kromer, if I'm correct. So my question is, would you be nearly as confident in the same group with Bobby Johnson leading the group? Well, yes, you're exactly right that I do believe in this offensive line, and a lot of that is rooted in my belief in Aaron Kromer. And so, yes, that gives me more optimism about this group. But I also think the talent level is better with this group of offensive linemen. And some of that is a belief that Spencer Brown and Ryan Bates will be even more effective in their second seasons as a starter. But Roger Saffold, this guy's a pull blocker, right? And we've talked a lot in this podcast about how next to center Mitch Morse, the left guard and right guard spots have just been really, really inconsistent in terms of play, but also the players that are delivering the below average play. I think the Bills finally have a guard situation that's worth a damn. And so I think the Bills will be better at both guard spots this year and at right tackle. And then you've got Deion Dawkins and Mitch Morse, who you know what you're getting out of those guys. So I think the coaching's better. I think the talent's better. And I think the vision for this offensive line is better. I've talked about this a ton in the podcast where the O-lines of the past and the run game philosophy was that they wanted to be multiple. Well, you can't be everything until you're something. And this Bills rushing offense is going to have a clear vision and an identity in what they do. And they have the offensive linemen that fit that vision, where all of these dudes are really, really good athletes. You're not trying to sprinkle in Darrell Williams anymore. And Darrell Williams is a good football player. But when Darrell Williams is one of your starting offensive linemen, you're very limited because he's a limited athlete. He doesn't have range. He's not going to get lateral and reach block and hit backside cutoffs. He's not going to get out into space and win. He wins with angles. He's a smart player, but he somewhat constipates your operation. You don't have John Feliciano constipating your offensive line. These are good athletes with a clear vision, with a great coach, and a lot of good talent. And I like the depth. We're not talking enough about David Quessenberry being part of this group. Tommy Doyle in year 2. Cody Ford finally with a good situation for him to actually take a step as a reserve. Greg Manns is an experienced player. I think this offensive line's in a really good spot. And I'm surprised that I feel so alone in that opinion. Get behind this Bills offensive line. It's the best thing they've put in front of Josh Allen since he was drafted. DK had a second question who said, Ed Oliver, Dawson Knox, Tremaine Edmunds, Jordan Poyer. How would you prioritize retaining them? How do you think Brandon Beane and the organization prioritizes retaining them? I think that Brandon Beane and I are going to see this very similarly. Premium positions, youth, draft picks. That's what you're going to prioritize. And if those are your priorities, I think the order is Oliver clearly number one because he's the only player that's a premium position. And then you have Dawson Knox and Tremaine Edmunds. I think for the Bills, the linebacker position is more important than tight end, so I'd put Tremaine Edmunds 2, Dawson Knox 3, and Jordan Poyer 4. Love Poe. Love him a lot. He's a 30-something-year-old safety. Prioritize your young players at premium positions that you drafted. Next one comes from Ryan, who says, as the Tremaine Edmunds debate rages on this summer, I always find myself on the side of keep him. My main argument against moving on from Edmunds is, who are you going to get that is an upgrade? Do you have any idea as to who the Bills could realistically target that is an upgrade over Edmunds? Well, it's a good question, and I side more on the keep him thing, but I've been teasing a Tremaine Edmunds podcast that is definitely going to come in the next few weeks where I will fully flesh out all of my thoughts on Tremaine Edmunds. We'll do 30 minutes on one player, Tremaine Edmunds, and so I'll dump all my thoughts there. But I do at this point, before I've really researched that podcast, I am on the side of keeping Tremaine Edmunds. And yes, I do think that you need to ask yourself questions about replaceability when you're considering this. You know what you have in Tremaine Edmunds. You know what he gives you. And you're still optimistic that there's a higher caliber of play that comes. Leslie Frazier, Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, over and over and over again, tell us that they are excited about Tremaine Edmunds and that he's the leader of the defense. Not one of the leaders of the defense, the leader of the defense. Making sure guys are lined up, getting the right calls in, adjusting his skill set, what he brings in coverage to take away certain throws, and how the Bills can get him up in the A-gaps and have him pedal out and cover distance and really disguise their intentions. I wish he made more plays. I do. I wish that he was more consistent. Yes. But he's really young and he's really talented. And he's been a very meaningful player on an elite NFL defense since he's walked into the NFL. You got a lot invested in this player. You've got him to this point. I'd want to continue working with him. And yes, replaceability is the thing. You're not going to have this big money to go sign somebody in free agency. Maybe you can get a stopgap veteran at a reasonable deal, but you're looking at a draft pick. You're looking at using a first, second, third round pick, something like that, on a linebacker. I just keep Tremaine. Whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. You can build the engagement ring of her dreams. Blue Nile has simple online tools that let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring, making sure that it is a one-of-a-kind ring. You can also celebrate life's special moments with fine jewelry. If you're looking for fine jewelry, but you're having trouble choosing, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Sports listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement rings. Use code LOCKEDON. That's code LOCKEDON. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever peace. Go to BlueNile.com today. The next one today comes from Justin, who says, with Aaron Kromer as the offensive line coach and the expectations of an improved unit, what do you think that means for Zach Moss? He seems like the forgotten man on this team. Also sticking with the running back theme, assuming the production is there, do you see James Cook getting a second contract since he is more of a pass-catching back than a runner, considering Beane offered J.D. McKissick a 2-year, $7 million deal? Great questions, Justin. First of all, I do think it is a good player to bring up in Zach Moss. And what Zach Moss has going for him that makes him different than every other player, whether it's Devin Singletary, James Cook, or even Duke Johnson, is he's 220-plus pounds. He's the one guy that you look at and say, this guy profiles as a very good short yardage and goal line back, and he's very good in pass protection. And so I know that we've yet to see Zach Moss be a great short yardage and goal line back, but he definitely has the type of skill set that you're looking for to do that. And that's very meaningful, right? Because we want to see some of those carries come off of Josh Allen. Zach Moss is your player that can do that. Here's what I'll say about Zach Moss. He's a player I liked coming out of Utah. A lot of people liked him coming out of Utah. He was a good player. Since he's been in the NFL, he's been hurt. Turf toe, the ankle. And we're talking early in his career, right? He's trying to acclimate, get used to playing in the NFL, learn the offense, kind of claim his role. And injuries have gotten in the way of that. Now, the problem with that is injuries have been a problem for him his entire football career. So I just don't know what the real ceiling here is and if you can ever really count on availability from Zach Moss. But yes, I do agree that there is a level of him being the forgotten man on this team right now that is worth mentioning. Now, as it goes to James Cook, and you said, assuming the production is there, do you see him being a second contract guy and referencing J.D. McKissic getting offered a 2-year, $7 million deal? Well, I think if James Cook is going to be a part of your backfield, right? He's going to be your 1A, 1B, not your primary guy, but a piece of your production. You like that type of skill set. You're always going to need another guy that you rely on. And that's what the Bills want, right? Brandon Beane's told us, Sean McDermott's told us they want to have multiple backs working together to share the load in the backfield. So it just comes down to, do you want to continue to try to find that James Cook player, or do you want to continue to find the complementary piece? To me, the complementary piece is the easier thing to find. If James Cook winds up being the player we think he's going to be in terms of really high-level pass-catching ability, speed to the perimeter, then go ahead and stay committed to that player while also keeping in mind that the complementary piece would be easier to find. You can find that downhill skill set, the vision, contact balance, power components guy to go with James Cook. You can find that guy every year, no problem. So, yeah, James Cook would be the guy that I would want to keep around. I don't know if 2 years, $7 million gets it done in 4 seasons. I have no idea. And I have no idea what the Bills' appetite will be for committing a bigger piece of the pie to running backs. But if he's the player that we think he's going to be, he's going to be a valuable piece of this offense, and that piece of the offense is the harder thing to find than the traditional downhill runner. Dylan says, if Tavon Austin makes the roster, who gets cut? You would assume the lowest many in order, as in Kromer, but with his special teams contributions, that makes it difficult. Could Tavon Austin really push the similar player in McKenzie off the roster? Love this question, Dylan. These are the things that run through my mind pretty much 24 hours a day. I think Jake Kumerow's making this team. I do. I really, really do. The Bills really like him. Sean McDermott's called him a glue guy, very meaningful four-phase special teams player, and then can kind of sprinkle in as your 5th, 6th receiver on offense from time to time. You can put him in bunch sets, ask him to block. You can occasionally get him going down the field. He brings some things to your team in an all-around way that matters. I think he's making it. I don't think Tavon Austin is going to push Jake Kumerow off the roster. And so the way I see this receiver core right now, it comes down to whether or not they keep 6 or 7. Traditionally, the Bills have kept 6 receivers. So if they keep 6, I think you have Diggs, Davis, Jamison Crowder, Khalil Shakir, Jake Kumerow, there's your 5, and then you have a spot for McKenzie or Austin. If you keep 7, I think you keep McKenzie and Austin. So suddenly, assuming everyone's healthy, Marquez Stevenson has a pretty steep climb to make this roster. I think he's the 8th guy on the depth chart right now. But what this is going to really come down to is which player between Tavon Austin and Isaiah McKenzie do you believe in more to handle your punt return duties? Which one? And maybe the answer is neither, and you like Khalil Shakir in that role. And then you start to have to ask yourself questions like, which player between Tavon Austin and Isaiah McKenzie will help our offense more, while also providing depth as a punt returner, but they're more primarily focused on playing offense. Tavon Austin's done a whole lot more in the NFL than Isaiah McKenzie. So I do think that this is going to be a really interesting camp battle. I mean, no doubt about it. But I don't think it's a Kumerow thing. I think it's a 6 or 7 thing. And if it's 7 and everyone's healthy, they're both in terms of McKenzie and Austin. If it's only 6, and you like what you have in Khalil Shakir as a punt returner, it could be Tavon Austin. Next question is a good one. I really like this one from Kyle, who says, what are your thoughts on the status of Bills ownership relative to the rest of the league? I know people have differing opinions on the new stadium deal, and I'm not a huge hockey guy, so I don't know much about the Sabres situation. However, the Pegulas seem to be willing to pay a lot out of pocket in terms of bonuses that allow Beane to do some of his cap gymnastics. Not all teams in the league are willing to do that right now. They also built a state-of-the-art practice facility, which in my opinion helps solidify the culture change we saw at the start of the McDermott era. With the sale of the Broncos and possibility of teams like the Commanders and Seahawks being up for sale in the future, it's likely these owners will have just more money. Do you see any reason we should be concerned moving forward? So, Kyle, I kind of see the Pegulas a lot like you do in terms of don't really pay attention to the hockey side. You feel really good about their ability or their willingness to allow Brandon Beane to manipulate the cap, and you love the new facilities that they were able to deliver. And so I look at it like this. And I've had some pretty passionate conversations with some of my colleagues at the Draft Network about how certain teams out there just have ownership problems. They just have ownership problems, and nothing's going to be different until their owner is gone. For the Bills, what I really like about the Pegulas is that they are involved, but they're also seemingly pretty hands-off. They let football people do football things. I remember listening to an interview with Terry Pegula one time, and I think it was about Josh Allen and his contract situation. And he was asked about it, and his response was, you got to ask the general manager, which is exactly what you want your owner to say, right? So too many of these owners. Jerry Jones does a friggin' press conference after every game. You're lucky to hear Terry Pegula once a year. So I like how they're involved, but hands off. You know, I also think about another, the last time I heard Terry Pegula was on Matty Glab's podcast. And it was Kim and Terry, and it was going into the playoffs this past year. The Bills were going to play the Patriots. And Matty asked a question along the lines of, from an ownership perspective, what is different for you when it comes to regular season versus the playoffs? And Terry answered the question, and he goes, you know, the biggest question that we face is the same thing that we face during the regular season, and that's where we're going to be during the week, whether that's Florida or New York, and who's going to watch the Dogs. I mean, that's what he's concerned about, and that's what I want him to be concerned about. He asks a lot of questions. Apparently, he keeps good notes, and they have good conversations, and he has great relationships with Brandon Beane and his staff and Sean McDermott and a lot of players. But at the end of the day, they let football people do football things. They've spared no expense, whether that's the staff, right? Brandon Beane has a very robust staff. Sean McDermott has a very robust staff. The Bills have a very robust scouting department. Every single time that I'm on the road at a game or an event, there are Bills scouts and personnel people there every single time they travel, and that's an expense to the organization. I don't see that for every other team. So the Bills spare no expense when it comes to the staff, and that extends deeply. Coaching, front office, travel, it's all there. And obviously the facilities spare no expense, and they spare no expense on this roster. The Bills have the most expensive roster in the NFL right now in terms of cash commitments. So that's what I want to hear from my owners. That you write checks willingly, you let football people do football things, and you're involved, but you're hands off. But I will say this about the Pegulas. You know, the Sabres situation, I'm not super dialed in, but it doesn't seem to be great. It seems like there's some momentum right now, and they face some criticism for, you know, this GM that they hired, but looking pretty good. But it's been a while, right? It's taken some time here. A lot of mishires when it comes to GMs and head coaches. And they had a major fail with their first head coaching hire with the Bills and Rex Ryan. I have no idea how you can. Okay, first of all, I have no idea why you would invite Rex Ryan to interview to be the head coach of your football team. So that's first of all. No idea why you'd be interested in talking to that man. And then also have no idea how that man can sit across from you and you say, yeah, this is it. This is the guy that's going to change the dynamics in the course of our franchise. He's going to be the one. I don't know how you get to that conclusion. I really don't. And so I think there's a level of luck, and maybe it's not luck. Maybe I should give them more credit from learning from their mistake of hiring Rex Ryan and pivoting to the complete opposite guy in Sean McDermott. But I give the Pegulas a lot of credit for the state of the Bills right now because I think they've done all the stuff that I said beforehand. But I go to Sean McDermott as the guy that has really implemented the right processes to get this team where it is today. That's the dude that pushed for Brandon Beane and pushed for the facilities and really crafted this vision. Now, Brandon Beane came in, a few months in, and they've worked together and collaborated. But the hire of Sean McDermott has changed this franchise. Don't forget the Pegulas did it. They hired Rex Ryan. And they hired all those failed coaches and GMs with the Sabres. So again, maybe it's a lot of learning. I think we've all done that in our lives. Imagine like any job that you would take, right? There's always a curve. You're learning. You're the new people. There's a lot to figure out. Imagine that being as an NFL owner. It's probably a pretty hard thing to step in and do. It's not like you step in with experience. I know they had experience running the Sabres, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like the Sabres and the Bills, it's the same like the same thing. Hockey and football, it's different. But even that's, what I'm trying to say is like you get hired into jobs, right? And you have to learn. I imagine it's pretty challenging learning how to own and operate an NFL franchise. So what I'm trying to get at here is maybe they have learned great lessons that allowed them to get the right people in place and them to do the things and empower them to do what they need to do to build a winner. And to their credit, it's happening right now. But I do not forget that they hired Rex Ryan. I do not forget that. The next one comes from Bub, who says, Genesee or Labatt and bottle, can, or draft. So here's the thing. Not a big beer guy. But if I have to drink beer, I guess, or if I choose to drink beer, I do prefer draft beer over can or bottle. I don't like can at all. So it'd be draft, bottle, and then like way, way down is can. I'm more of a bourbon drink guy. So Jack and Diet, an old-fashioned whiskey sour, or you can just pour it neat, and I'll like that. I'm a big Screwball guy. I really like Screwball. That peanut butter whiskey, I can sip on that and really enjoy myself. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including this year's NBA championship, the NHL conference finals, Major League Baseball, football's futures, and, of course, all the latest fights from MMA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. It's BetOnline, and it's where the game starts. Next one today comes from Gordon, who says, I was hoping to get your thoughts on what we can learn about Brandon Beane's draft approach from this year's draft. It seems like the way he approached this draft was a little different. Historically, I feel like he has always taken best player available, sometimes missing out on bigger needs for positional repeats due to BPA. Now, obviously, we don't have access to the Bills board, but it seems like the Bills took a couple of guys earlier than how many people ranked them, such as Terrell Bernard and James Cook. Seems to me that they drafted those guys with a specific need and role in mind. Now, maybe they were the best player left on the board, but do you think we saw a slight adaptation to drafting philosophy this year? Do you think it's a product of some new voices in the room, such as Dorsey and Kromer, or just a luxury because Big Baller Beane has built such a fantastic roster? Curious what you think. Roster construction is my favorite topic. Me too, Gordon. Love this question. Really love this question. And I do think that we saw Brandon Beane take a different approach this year. And I think you can look at a lot of his drafts and feel like there was a certain vision in mind with the decisions that were made. And I think for this year's team or this year's draft, Brandon Beane did focus somewhat on needs, but what I think he focused on was evolving their football operation. That's what I think he focused in on. And I point to the James Cook pick and the Terrell Bernard pick as examples of that. in the first round, they needed a corner, right? It was the most obvious thing in the world. They needed a corner. They like Kyer Elam. They picked him, and that's great. And I like what Kyer Elam can bring to this team and how he can help evolve the scheme by playing more man, press coverage, the athleticism, the ball skills. I think it's going to be wonderful. But focusing more on the Cook and Bernard picks, to me, there's a lot of scheme evolution at the root of those selections. Wanting to have a pass-catching back, wanting to have more speed at running back, and what that can mean for your football operation and your offensive scheme. Wanting to have that third linebacker, a really good athlete, a guy that can play in coverage, you can go base 4-3 defense and maintain your nickel principles. He does a lot in terms of how you can play other teams. And we've talked a lot about the Bills potentially playing more 3 linebacker sets this year, given the Jets, Patriots, and Dolphins are going to be run-heavy teams. The entire AFC North is run-heavy. Titans and Colts are run-heavy. And then you want to play home football games late in the season, right, in January, playoffs, and that's going to be running the football and stopping the run. And when Josh Allen's your quarterback, teams are going to want to run the football because they want to keep 17 on the sideline. So being able to do what you do in terms of a base nickel defense, but having a linebacker like Terrell Bernard on the field more often will help you deal with the run-heavy approach that other teams are going to have against you. So I think scheme evolution and adaptation and evolution of just what they want to be able to do with their personnel was at the root of those draft picks. And the reason I was hesitant to agree with, or not, well, I wouldn't say not agree with you, but I said earlier on that there was some more need was at the root of some of these picks. It wasn't long-term need, because we've been having these conversations about some of these expiring contracts like Dawson Knox, like Tremaine Edmunds, like Jordan Poyer, like Roger Saffold, and replacing those guys. There wasn't players drafted this year that look like they could push to be starters in place of Knox, Edmunds, Saffold, or Poyer. The long-term needs, I wouldn't agree were part of the thought process with these picks. I think they wanted specific skill sets to add to what they do, to be able to play the game a little differently offensively and defensively. Paul says, with the addition of James Cook and the increased athleticism of the offensive line, do you think we'll see more screen passes from the Bills this year? I hope so. I think that when you run more wide zone, it opens up a lot for the screen game. It opens up a lot for the RPO game. It opens up a lot for your bootleg and moving the pocket game. So, yeah, I think the screen game's part of that, but it's also the other stuff that I mentioned. It's just going to give you a little bit more in terms of how you can challenge defenses from your offensive scheme perspective and not just your skill sets. But one thing I will say about the screen situation in the Bills, and we've had a lot of conversations about this because the Bills haven't been a good screen team. But I think when Josh Allen's your quarterback, that's always going to make the screen game a little bit difficult. When defenses have to account for a mobile quarterback like Josh Allen, there's always going to be eyes in the backfield. And maybe it's not just straight up man coverage or straight up zone, but there's going to be spies. There's going to be an emphasis on where Josh Allen's at. And that means eyes in the backfield, which means, the surprise element of a screen is just going to be more difficult to deliver because defenses are dialed in on your backfield at all times because Josh Allen and how he can hurt you with his legs. Next one comes from Mike. Mike says, we keep talking about how all the skill players are either an upgrade or taking a step this year. Even assuming a small increase in overall production, there simply doesn't seem to be enough to go around for everyone. So considering we expect our running game to be more productive and our tight end room to take a considerable step, where does our wide receiver room regress? Is it Diggs or Davis versus what Sanders produced? Or do we expect Crowder to produce less than Beasley? What are your thoughts on this? All right, so I have an important thing that I'm going to say here in terms of direction, but what I do want to kind of present as a disclaimer, just something I want to say out in front of what I'm going to get to, is at some point in the next month or so, I'm going to do my offensive stat projections for the Buffalo Bills. I did this for the last couple of years, and I thought I did a pretty good job in terms of projecting market share and statistical production for the Bills' offensive weapons. And I'm going to do the same this year. And it's a pretty big crunch. And I don't just shootout numbers because I think they sound good. Like I go through and I think about passing attempts and where I think completion percentage is going to be and where I think yards per attempt is going to be and where I think the market share is going to be. And it all has to balance out, right? So it's a big numbers crunch. It's a pretty involved process. And until I do that, I really can't sit here and talk with a lot of specificity in how I think this all shakes out. But I will get there, and I will in the next month or so. And I can't wait to do that podcast. But I think what's important right now as we just kind of begin thinking about this is don't forget that between Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley, who were number 2 and number 3 on the team last year in targets, 184 targets from 2021 are freed up to be redistributed amongst this offensive personnel. That's a lot of targets. So some of that goes to Davis. Some of that goes to Crowder. Some of that goes to the tight ends. Some of that goes to the running backs. So it seems a little complicated, but 184 targets are there for the taking. And that's a good number to be dispersed and balance things out and deliver what we think this offense is capable of doing. And eventually I'll crunch it all out and tell you exactly where I see it all coming together. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Awesome questions this week. Greatly appreciate everyone who took the time to submit something, and hope you enjoyed listening to me respond to these. I'm guessing the rest of this week's going to be OTA heavy. We'll have practice reports. We'll have press conferences. So we'll break all of that down in the coming days, and I've got a lot of stuff holstered if it's a slow day or later in the week they wrap up OTAs early or whatever. So we've got a lot to get to. Don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.